I still remember the night my life changed though. At first it didn't feel like a blessing. It felt like another cruel twist of fate. My name is Isabella. I'm 28 years old, and for the past 2 years I had been living on the streets. To most people I was invisible, just another broken soul sitting on a sidewalk wrapped in the shadows of a life that had collapsed far too quickly. But behind the dirt and exhaustion, I still carried the weight of who I used to be, the daughter of a man once respected, the woman who once believed she had a future. I had lost it all in a storm of betrayal. My father Richard had built a company with his bare hands. We weren't rich beyond measure, but we lived with dignity. Until one partnership, one cruel twist of trust destroyed everything. Deals forged in his name, documents he never signed, whispers of corruption he could never prove false. It tore him apart. And when he died, it felt like the last piece of me had been ripped away too. My mother followed him not long after, her heart too broken to keep beating. Suddenly I was alone in the world. The money was gone, the house was gone, the friends disappeared as quickly as the bank accounts drained. I tried to fight to rebuild, but the walls closed in until there was nowhere left to go but the streets. And that was where he found me, William Lancaster. A name that meant wealth, arrogance, and power in every newspaper and glossy magazine. That night I saw him before he saw me. He stood in a suit that probably cost more than everything I had owned combined, glancing at his phone like the world itself bent around his schedule. I remember thinking he would pass me by like everyone else. But he stopped. He looked at me. And for reasons I couldn't understand, he spoke. "You need money." His tone was clipped, dismissive, the voice of a man who thought everything had a price. I should have nodded. I should have taken whatever bill he tossed and disappeared. But something inside me, something stubborn, defiant, still alive, refused to let him treat me like I was less than human. "What is this, a social experiment?" I asked, my voice sharp, despite the hunger in my stomach. "Do you toss me a coin if I answer the right way, or just walk off if I don't?" The look on his face, I'll never forget it. No one talked to William Lancaster like that. Not his employees, not his partners, not even the women who clung to his arm at galas. But I did. He didn't walk away. Instead he leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "Come with me to an event. I'll pay you enough to change your life." I should have laughed in his face. I should have told him I wasn't some prop he could rent for the night. And maybe part of me did laugh because I remember chuckling bitterly, shaking my head, asking him if he always used such ridiculous lines. But when he didn't flinch, when he stood there waiting for my answer, I realized this wasn't just arrogance. There was desperation there, hidden under his polished exterior. He needed me for something, so I said yes. Not because of the money, though I'd be lying if I said that didn't matter, but because I was curious. Curious how far a man like him would go. Curious what kind of game he was playing, and what it might cost him if I played better. That's how I ended up in his car, staring out at the glowing city, as if it belonged to someone else. He watched me, waiting for questions I didn't ask. When he finally broke the silence, asking if I wasn't curious where we were headed, I smirked. Someplace expensive, I imagine. It was a wedding. His ex-fiancée's wedding. Olivia Harrington, the woman who had left him for another man, and who now flaunted her perfect life in his face by inviting him to witness it. He couldn't show up alone, he said. It would make him look weak. So he had chosen me, a woman pulled off the street to walk into that glittering hall by his side. Part of me should have been terrified. But as the stylist washed the dirt from my hair, painted my face with colors I had almost forgotten, and draped me in silk and diamonds, I didn't feel fear. I felt something else. Power. Not the kind William thought he was giving me, but the kind that came from knowing I was walking into a room where every eye would be on me, and no one would ever guess where I came from. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a stranger. I saw the woman I used to be, the one who belonged in those rooms, who knew how to hold her chin high and smile like she carried secrets no one else could touch. That night, as I stepped out of his car onto the red carpet, I felt the stares burn into my skin. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Who was she, this mysterious woman at William Lancaster's side? Olivia's smile faltered when she saw me, and in that moment, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't just his weapon of revenge. I was my own, and Olivia Harrington had no idea what was coming. The wedding hall shimmered with chandeliers, each crystal catching the light like shards of ice. Everywhere I looked there were sequins, diamonds, champagne flutes lifted high, and smiles stretched wide with carefully practiced perfection. These people lived in a world far removed from mine, yet I didn't feel small in it. Not tonight. Tonight I carried myself with the poise my father once taught me, the kind that money couldn't buy and tragedy couldn't erase. William walked beside me, his arms steady, his jaw tight. He wasn't smiling. He didn't need to. His presence alone commanded attention, but paired with me it became something else entirely. A spectacle, a storm waiting to break. I could feel Olivia's eyes on us the moment we entered, her perfect lips, tightening, her posture stiffening as if my very existence was a threat she hadn't prepared for. I didn't look away. I wanted her to see me. I wanted her to feel that she hadn't won, not in the way she thought she had. As we moved through the hall, I could hear the whispers ripple. Who is she? Did you see her dress? She doesn't look like the others he's dated. Every murmur only fueled the fire inside me. They didn't know the truth that hours ago I was nothing more than a woman huddled on a cold sidewalk. They didn't know that beneath the diamonds I still carried the scars of betrayal and loss. And I wasn't about to tell them. Let them wonder, let them choke on their envy. At the table, William leaned in close, his voice low enough that only I could hear. You're handling this better than I expected. I turned my head slightly, meeting his gaze. What did you expect? That I'd tremble, that I'd break. His lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. Most would. I'm not most, I whispered. And for the first time I saw something shift in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or curiosity. Whatever it was, it unsettled him and I reveled in it. Then came the moment Olivia approached. She glided across the room like a queen returning to her throne, her gown sparkling, her new husband trailing dutifully behind her. When she stopped at our table, her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. William, she said sweetly, though venom laced every syllable, I didn't think you'd actually come. He rose, polite, controlled. You invited me. Did you expect me to hide? Her gaze flickered to me, then sweeping me from head to toe with a precision meant to belittle. But when her eyes met mine, she faltered. Because I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, my lips curving into a calm, unshakable smile. And who is this? She asked, though I could tell the question tasted bitter on her tongue. William opened his mouth to respond, but I beat him to it. Someone who knows what it means to lose everything and still rise. My voice was soft, but it carried. I watched her mask crack just slightly, as though she sensed there was more truth in my words than she wanted to admit. For the rest of the evening I played my role to perfection. I laughed at William's remarks. I spoke with elegance to strangers. I danced with the grace of someone who had nothing left to fear. All the while, Olivia's eyes kept returning to me, her composure slipping every time she saw me smile. But as the night deepened, I felt something else stirring beneath the surface. This wasn't just about Olivia, it wasn't even just about William's petty revenge. This was about me, about reclaiming a piece of myself I thought I had lost forever. Every compliment, every admiring glance, every whisper of curiosity, it was proof that I wasn't invisible. That I still had power even if the world had tried to strip it away. Yet power is a dangerous thing. It tempts you, seduces you, convinces you that you're untouchable. And as I stood on the balcony later that night, the city lights sprawling beneath me, I couldn't ignore the voice in my head whispering that this was only the beginning. William joined me there, his expression unreadable. For a long time neither of us spoke. The music from the hall drifted faintly through the glass doors, mingling with the cool night air. Finally he said, you were remarkable tonight. I glanced at him, arching a brow. You sound surprised. I am. He hesitated, then added, you're not what I expected. I let out a quiet laugh, bitter and soft. No one ever expects me. That's their mistake. He studied me, then really studied me, as though seeing past the gown and jewels to the woman beneath. And though I hated myself for it, part of me wondered what he saw. A pawn, an ally. Something else entirely. Whatever it was, I knew one thing, this story was far from over. The night dragged on in a blur of laughter, music, and the clinking of champagne glasses. I kept my mask firmly in place, smiling when I needed to, speaking only when it mattered, and letting Olivia squirm under the weight of my presence. It was strange how quickly the balance had shifted. Hours ago I had been invisible. Now every eye seemed drawn to me, curious, suspicious, envious. But behind the mask, my heart was a storm. I wasn't used to this world anymore. The glittering wealth, the sharp whispers, the games people played with one another's lives. It reminded me too much of what I'd lost, of how fragile power and reputation really were. Still, I refused to let it show. Tonight I wasn't the broken woman from the street. Tonight I was someone they could never quite place, someone they couldn't dismiss. At one point Olivia cornered me near the powder room. Her perfect smile was gone, her eyes blazing with a fury she tried to disguise as poise. "You think you've made an impression tonight?" she hissed, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "But I see through you. Women like you don't belong here." I tilted my head, studying her, and let a slow smile curve my lips. "Funny," I said softly, "that's exactly what I thought about women like you." For a moment she froze, thrown off by my calm. Then she spun on her heel, her gown trailing behind her like a cloud of rage. I stood there, my chest pounding, but I didn't let her see my fear. Because the truth was, I wasn't afraid of her anymore. Later, back at the table, William leaned close. "What did she say to you?" I shrugged, keeping my tone light. "Nothing worth repeating." But inside something shifted. Olivia's words weren't just insults, they were reminders. Reminders that I was walking on borrowed ground, that the life I once had was gone, and that no matter how many jewels sparkled around my neck, I still carried the weight of my past. When the final toast was made and the bride and groom disappeared into the night, I felt an odd relief. The performance was over. The eyes turned away. I could breathe again. But as William and I slipped out into the cool night air, the silence between us felt heavier than it had before. In the car, he finally broke it. "You did more than I asked tonight," he said, his voice low. "You didn't just play the part, you owned it." I turned to face him, searching his expression. "And what did that prove for you, William? That you could walk into her wedding and make her jealous? That you could use me as a weapon?" His jaw tightened. "It wasn't just that." "Then what?" I pressed. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out the window, the city lights casting shadows across his face. "She left me because she thought I couldn't give her what she wanted. Tonight I wanted her to see that she was wrong." I let out a bitter laugh. "You wanted her to see you could replace her, that you could buy another woman's presence, dress her up and parade her like proof." His head snapped toward me, his eyes blazing. "That's not what I see when I look at you." The words caught me off guard, silencing the sharp retort on my tongue. For a long moment we just stared at each other, the air thick with something I couldn't name. Then I looked away, my chest tight. I didn't want to feel anything for him, not curiosity, not sympathy, certainly not attraction. But the way he said it, the raw edge in his voice, lingered in my mind. When we reached the penthouse, he surprised me again. Instead of dismissing me, instead of treating me like a finished transaction, he poured 2 glasses of wine and motioned for me to join him on the balcony. The city stretched out before us, alive with light and noise, but up here it felt like another world. "You were right about one thing," he said after a long silence. "I did bring you tonight because of her. But it stopped being about her the moment you walked into that room. You weren't my revenge, Isabella. You were something else." My breath caught. Hearing my name in his voice, spoken not as an order, but as something fragile, unsettled me more than I cared to admit. I gripped the glass in my hand, staring at the glittering skyline. "Careful, William. You're starting to sound human." He gave a quiet laugh, one that didn't feel like his usual arrogance. "Maybe that's what scares me." I didn't respond. I couldn't, because deep down beneath the layers of pain and betrayal, a terrifying thought had begun to take root. What if this night wasn't the end of something? What if it was the beginning? The days after the wedding blurred together, yet each moment carried a strange weight. I hadn't expected to see William again, not after the performance we had put on. I assumed he would send me away with money tucked in an envelope and that would be the end of it. But he didn't. Instead, he called the next morning, and the morning after that. At first I ignored him. What did a man like William Lancaster want with a woman like me beyond the spectacle I had already given him? But persistence was his weapon, and eventually I answered. That's how I found myself back in his world, Not as a guest dragged off the street, but as someone he seemed unwilling to let go of. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was only entertaining him until the novelty wore off. But deep down, I sensed something else was pulling me in. Something I didn't want to name. William started showing me pieces of himself I had never expected. Not the ruthless businessman, not the arrogant millionaire, but a man haunted by his own emptiness. Late at night, when the city quieted, and the weight of his empire pressed too heavily on his shoulders, he would talk. About Olivia. About the betrayal. About how much of his life was built not on joy, but on proving himself to others. "You think money fills the void," he admitted once, his voice low, his eyes fixed on the skyline. "But it doesn't. It only makes the silence louder." I should have laughed. I should have reminded him how his kind had destroyed families like mine, how his world of greed and power had no space for sympathy. But instead I found myself listening. And worse, I understood. Because I too knew what it felt like to carry silence like a burden, to live with shadows that never left no matter how much light surrounded me. Still, I couldn't forget who I was or where I had come from. Every luxury he offered me, clothes, food, shelter, was a reminder of everything I had lost. Some nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was betraying my parents' memory by even standing in his world. And yet another truth gnawed at me. For the first time in years I felt seen. One evening he asked me to accompany him to a gala. "It won't be like the wedding," he said. "This time it's not about anyone else. I just want you there." Want. His words disarmed me. They weren't slick or calculated. They carried a hesitation I had never heard in him before. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The gala was a sea of glitter and power, but I walked in with my chin high, no longer feeling like a stranger draped in borrowed jewels. I belonged not because of what I wore, but because I carried myself with the fire of someone who had survived. I could feel eyes on me again, whispers trailing in my wake, but they no longer cut into me. They fueled me. Throughout the night William stayed close, not as though he owned me, but as though he needed me there to steady him. When he introduced me, it wasn't with arrogance, but with something almost prideful. And for reasons I couldn't explain, my chest tightened each time his hand brushed mine. But as much as I wanted to sink into the illusion, the truth clawed at me. After all, William Lancaster wasn't just any man. He was part of the very world that had taken everything from me. The breaking point came when I stumbled across a familiar name in one of his files, a name tied to the betrayal that had ruined my father. My blood froze, rage boiling in my veins. I realized then that William knew more than he had admitted. That night I confronted him. My voice shook with fury as I demanded the truth. Did you know your deals, your people destroyed my family, that your empire is built on the ashes of my life?" He went pale, his mask slipping. For once William had no polished answer, no clever deflection. He whispered only, "I didn't know it was you." The words cut deeper than a blade, because whether he knew or not, the damage was done. And suddenly, everything, the wedding, the gala, the late-night confessions, felt like another cruel twist of fate. I turned away from him, my chest heaving, my hands trembling. I had walked willingly into the arms of the man tied to my greatest loss. And I didn't know whether to hate him or to hate myself. I barely remember leaving his penthouse that night. My heart was pounding so violently that every step felt like an earthquake inside my chest. The city lights blurred as I stumbled onto the street, rage and grief twisting together, until I could hardly breathe. For years I had lived with the knowledge that my father's death was not just tragedy, but betrayal, that someone had orchestrated his ruin. And now the face of that betrayal, the world it came from, was the same man whose arms I had begun to let myself trust. I spent the next days in hiding, back on the familiar cold corners of the city, away from his reach. The gown he had given me hung in a torn bag at my side, its silk mocking me with memories of a world I should never have touched. My mind ran in circles trying to make sense of what had happened. Had William known all along? Or had I simply been another casualty of the greed that ran through his veins, blind to the lives crushed underfoot? And yet I couldn't banish the memory of his face when I confronted him, pale, shaken, stripped of the arrogance that usually clung to him like armor. His voice still echoed in my head. I didn't know it was you, but ignorance didn't erase guilt. And it didn't bring my father back. On the third night, as I huddled beneath a crumbling awning to shield myself from the rain, a car pulled up. The headlights sliced through the storm, and when the door opened, it was William. He stepped out without an umbrella, letting the rain soak his expensive suit. His eyes fixed on me, as though I were the only person in the world. "Isabella," he said, his voice raw, "please, let me explain." I wanted to scream, to tell him to leave me there to rot the way he and his kind had left my family. But my voice betrayed me, breaking as I whispered. "Explain what?" "That my father's blood is on the hands of your empire. That while you were climbing higher, I was watching everything I loved turn to ash." Rain streaked down his face, but I couldn't tell where the water ended and his tears began. "I didn't know," he said again, "but once I did, I started digging, and I found the truth." I narrowed my eyes, the fury barely contained. "What truth?" He hesitated, then pulled a folder from inside his coat, holding it out like an offering. My hands trembled as I snatched it from him, flipping through page after page of contracts, emails, signatures. And there, in black and white, was a name I hadn't spoken in years: my father's business partner. The man who had framed him, who had sold him out, who had walked away clean while my father crumbled. It wasn't William, but it was someone William knew, someone he had worked with. "You see," he said softly, "I was guilty of blindness, of arrogance. But the one who orchestrated it, the one who destroyed him, was not me. It was a man I trusted too, and I swear to you, Isabella, I will bring him down." His words rattled me to the core, because in that moment I realized that the man who had once been my enemy was now offering me the very thing I had craved for years: justice. But justice was never pure. It came twisted, tangled with motives we could never fully untangle. Did I trust him because he was sincere? Or because I needed him, because I couldn't fight this battle alone? I closed the folder, my heart thundering. "If you're lying to me, William, if this is another game..." My voice cracked, but I forced the words out. "I'll destroy you myself." He didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes searching mine with a desperation I hadn't seen before. "Then, let me prove it. Let me fight with you, not against you." The rain poured harder, drenching us both, but neither of us moved. In that fragile, dangerous moment, I realized my story had shifted. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore, it was about vengeance, and whether I wanted to or not, I was standing at the edge of it, with William Lancaster at my side. And I knew once we crossed that line there would be no turning back. We began to move like hunters, not lovers, at least not yet. Our nights turned into dossiers and whispered meetings, my fingers tracing signatures and dates, until the paper blurred. William used his reach. I used everything he couldn't buy. Memory, the stubbornness that had kept me alive on the street, the names whispered in alleys, and the slivers of truth people thought they'd buried. We called old partners, followed bank trails, found the shell companies, the side accounts, the men who thought themselves invisible. Every revelation felt like a reopening of the wound, and at the same time a small stitch sewing me back together. I learned to read greed like a map. Greed always left footsteps. Greed, it turned out, was sloppy. The night we decided to strike, we did it where the world would have to watch. Olivia loved the light, its flattering angles, the applause. So we took the light and pointed it at her. We didn't ambush her with rage. We landed the evidence on a marble table and let the truth speak with the cold, dry clarity only paper and recordings can give. Contracts with forged signatures, email chains that exposed the manipulation, recorded conversations that matched the dates when my father's accounts were siphoned. William handed the files to a prosecutor. He trusted the kind of man who once wore my father's calls for help, like a scar on his conscience. The prosecutor moved like a blade. In a week, the headlines changed their tune. The empire that Olivia had built of glare and whispered promises started to crack. I remember the day the arrest happened as if it were already seared into my chest. The ballroom was full of light and marble and older men craning to see what scandal would spice their feeds. Olivia's face, once smooth with practiced composure, went paper thin, as the officers read the charges. She screamed like a woman whose life had never had to be honest, whose power had always been bought and assumed. Watching her led away, I felt a strange numb relief that had nothing to do with joy. The relief was simpler. Somebody finally had to answer. Somebody finally had to be held to the measure of what they had done. When it was over, the silence afterward was heavier than any applause. People resumed their lives. Investors moved on, the tabloids found a new scandal. But for me, the work had only just started. There were meetings with lawyers, settlements to pursue, apologies to extract that meant nothing to the people we'd lost. William wanted to build me a company with his name tucked into every contract. He wanted to pay me back in a way the world would understand. I refused his first offer. I wanted my name, my way, proof that I could make something honest that belonged to me. He listened. He learned how to wait without trying to buy my consent. DO Consulting opened not as a monument to revenge, but as a careful reclaiming. I hired people who knew risk because they had lived it. We advised small businesses, we helped families rebuild without letting debt devour them. Each success felt like a small apology to my father, to my mother, to the versions of myself I had thought I'd lost. It was slow work, the kind that doesn't make headlines, but it mattered in the quiet places where change actually happens. William stayed by my side, but we rebuilt differently. There were nights we laughed without the sharp edge of strategy. There were nights we fought with the rawness of two people who'd been broken and were learning how to be honest. He told me he loved me more times than I expected, and each time it landed differently, sometimes like comfort, sometimes like a risk. I loved him too, and I also loved the life that I had fought for with my own hands. Loving him didn't mean surrendering myself. It meant choosing him in full view of my scars, not as a cure for them. I forgave not because forgiveness erased the past, but because I refused to live in a prison carved by someone else's cruelty. Forgiveness for me was a decision. I would not let bitterness become my permanent resident. That didn't mean Olivia's deeds were forgotten. Justice had its course. It meant I chose to step forward into a life where grief could be honored without being worshipped. If there is a lesson I would press into your palm, it is this: vengeance can be a fire that consumes. But truth is steadier. Truth can be turned into justice when you have the courage to follow it. And reclaiming your life rarely looks like a single dramatic act. It is a series of small, stubborn choices to stand when you could sit with sorrow, to build when you could collapse into defeat, to ask for what is yours in the voice that whispers your name. If my story touched something inside you, anger, hope, the ache of something lost, please do me one favor. Like this video. If it moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that truth matters. And subscribe for more stories of ordinary people who fought back. Tell me in the comments, have you ever reclaimed a part of your life that someone else tried to take? Your voice could be the courage someone else needs today.